Last night, an explosive interview on the Conrad show turned from tense to utterly jaw-dropping when Liverpool's Mohamed Salah was blindsided with a shocking, racially charged accusation by the host during a so-called tribute episode. But what Mohamed Salah did next shocked everyone. Before we continue with the story, tell us where you're watching from. If you like this story, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because tomorrow we have an exciting story you won't want to miss. The episode had been advertised for a week. A tribute to a legend, Mohamed Salah's journey. A rare sit-down with the globally celebrated footballer on one of Britain's most watched and notoriously confrontational talk shows, the Conrad show. But if the title sounded flattering, it couldn't have been more misleading. The studio lights were hot, the audience buzzing. Salah, clad in a simple navy blazer over a white shirt, calm, composed and respectful, took his seat across from the show's infamous host, Conrad. Known for his abrasive persona and thirst for controversy, Conrad's smug grin carried a tinge of condescension from the moment Salah sat down. "Mohamed," Conrad began, flipping through his cue cards with mock reverence, "you've scored over 200 goals for Liverpool. You've broken records, you're adored by millions, but I have to ask, is it really merit, or just the media trying to sell the world a diversity mascot?" The audience shifted. A few gasps. Salah blinked, eyes narrowing for a beat, but he said nothing. His silence wasn't fear, it was calculation. Conrad, sensing the reaction, leaned in like a vulture smelling blood. "I mean," Conrad continued, eyes gleaming with provocation, "you're Egyptian. You're Muslim. You pray on the pitch, and people call that inspiring. But if we're being honest, some folks would call that divisive. Controversial, even. You're not exactly what people picture when they think football royalty in England, are you?" Salah's jaw clenched, barely. He adjusted his posture, still no outburst, still no fury. "What are you trying to say, exactly?" he asked coolly. "Oh, come on, Mo," Conrad said with mock sincerity. "Don't act surprised. You're a poster boy for global football because the world's obsessed with quotas now. People want to feel good about inclusion. But when it comes to pure, raw English football legacy, you'll never be on the same tier as someone like Rooney or Gerrard or Shearer, because you're, let's face it, not one of us." A heavy silence swept the room. The camera panned across the audience, a sea of raised eyebrows, stiffened shoulders, uncomfortable side glances. Someone coughed nervously. Salah didn't break eye contact. With the same calm he brought to taking penalties in front of 50,000 screaming fans, Salah replied, "You invited me to this show calling it a tribute. Now it feels like a trap. Is that how you respect people's legacies here? Or is that only reserved for people who look like you?" Conrad scoffed, throwing his hands up dramatically. "Oh, please, don't play the victim card. We're just having an honest conversation. If you can't take the heat—" "This isn't honesty," Salah interrupted, his voice razor-sharp but steady. "This is bait, and I see it for what it is. You think you're being clever, provocative, but all you're doing is proving that no matter how much someone achieves, some people will still reduce them to where they're from or what they believe." There was a ripple of applause, small but real. Conrad's smirk faltered, unwilling. "To let go," he pressed on, his voice tightening. "You say that, but what have you really done for football culture in the UK? You've never won a Ballon d'Or. You don't drink with the lads. You don't have scandals. You're sterile. Robotic. Where's the fire? Where's the drama? You play it safe." That was when Salah leaned in slightly, his gaze steady and unflinching. "I don't need to be in tabloids or bars to inspire. I've walked a road most wouldn't survive. I grew up in a small village with sand instead of pitches. I trained without shoes. I moved countries not speaking the language. I prayed in empty locker rooms, and I still showed up every weekend, gave my all and earned the love of millions. Not by shouting, not by drinking, not by brawling, but by staying humble, working harder than anyone else, and never forgetting who I am." The crowd began clapping, louder this time. Conrad tried to wave them down. "Fine," Conrad sneered. "You're humble. You're pure. But that doesn't make you a legend. In fact, it makes you bland. You're not cut from the same cloth as the icons of old. You don't have the fire that made them unforgettable. You're a Manufactured hero. Salah tilted his head. Icons of old, he repeated. You mean the ones who beat up teammates in training? The ones who were in courtrooms more than classrooms? Is that what you mean by fire? The audience was beginning to murmur, louder now. A few people outright laughed at Conrad. He wasn't used to this. He shifted in his chair, tugging at his collar. Salah continued. The problem isn't that I'm different from your so-called legends. The problem is that you can't accept someone not from here, someone who believes differently, being great without fitting your flawed image of greatness. Conrad's smile had entirely vanished now. You've got a chip on your shoulder. Mo admitted. Salah shook his head. No, what I have is clarity. And your show's not a tribute, it's a mirror. And what you see in it, that's what really bothers you. The room erupted. Applause, cheering, whistles. Conrad threw his arms up, exasperated, calling for quiet, trying to regain control. But the tide had turned. Still seated, Salah folded his hands, patient, waiting. Conrad flushed, tried one more jab. If you're so pure and inspiring, why don't you ever call out the problems in your own community, huh? What about Salah? Didn't flinch. I won't let you derail this. You didn't invite me to talk about football, you invited me to be insulted, but I've spent my whole life turning disrespect into fuel. The crowd was on its feet now, and the cameras were still rolling. And then Conrad made a fatal mistake, one sentence too far. And you'll never be a real legend here, Mo. Not while you still bow your head to Mecca instead of Wembley, for me. Audience gasped. Someone shouted, "What the hell?" Security glanced at each other. The producer off stage looked pale. Salah's expression didn't crack, but his voice dropped lower. And what he said next would set the tone for the fallout to come. Salah leaned forward, eyes locked on Conrad, with a calm so intense it was unnerving. The studio, moments ago buzzing with applause and shock, had gone utterly silent. You could hear the cameras whirring, the mics picking up every breath, every creak of a chair. Salah's voice didn't rise, it sharpened. You don't get to define what a legend looks like, he said. Not when your idea of greatness is stuck in the past and poisoned by prejudice. You think bowing my head to God makes me less of a player? Less of a man? I've carried the pride of a nation, of an entire region, without ever raising my voice, without disrespecting anyone. That scares you, doesn't it? Conrad opened his mouth, but Salah didn't let him interrupt. I've never asked to be accepted by people like you, Salah continued. But here's the truth you're afraid to say out loud. No matter how much you try to erase me, I'm already part of football history. And it's not because of your approval, it's despite it. A few audience members clapped instinctively, unsure if they should. Conrad waved them down again, face reddening, voice cracking with forced composure. Mohamed, don't lecture. Me on fear. I've interviewed world leaders, war criminals, tech billionaires. You're not special. This show challenges everyone. You're acting like you're the first person who's been put under the spotlight. Salah gave a soft, almost pitying laugh. No, I'm not the first, but I might be the first who walked into your trap knowing exactly what you were going to try, and stayed seated anyway. The air thickened with tension. Even the band in the corner sat motionless, instruments untouched. The director behind the scenes was gesturing wildly, but no one was cutting to commercial. This was gold, or a public relations disaster, depending on which side you were on. You know what this is? Salah said, gesturing to the cameras. It's theatre. You brought me here hoping I'd get angry, that I'd shout storm off or confirm every stereotype you quietly believe. But I don't need to shout to be heard, and I don't need to fight you to win, Conrad snapped back, defensive now. If you didn't want to be questioned, you shouldn't have come on a show known for it. You're trying to play victim while dodging real scrutiny. This isn't scrutiny, Salah replied, eyes narrowing. This is a performance. You pretend to challenge people, but you only provoke those who don't look like you. I've seen your interviews with English players. Banter, soft questions, nostalgia. But the moment someone like me sits here, it turns into suspicion, insinuations, and twisted accusations. That's not journalism. That's bigotry in a suit. The room shifted again, tension giving way to murmurs of agreement. Several audience members had pulled out phones recording. Security at the stage edge stiffened. Conrad, trying to regain some control, smirked. Okay, Mr. Morality, let's test that dignity of yours. You think you're such a role model? Tell. Us then? What about the accusations that you refuse to speak out on issues back home in Egypt? Human rights, women's rights, political oppression? Salah didn't blink. I'm a footballer, not a politician, and I'm not naive. I know my voice matters, so I use it carefully. I build schools. I donate anonymously. I fund hospitals. I speak where it matters when it counts. Not to feed your headlines, he paused. But since we're asking real questions, let me ask you something. When was the last time you did anything with your platform besides tear people down for ratings? The audience erupted again. This time the applause was overwhelming, sustained, rising, cutting off whatever retort Conrad had begun to form. He glanced to the side, muttering something to the producer in his earpiece, but the damage was done. Still, Conrad pushed forward, his voice tighter, tinged with desperation now. You're trying to paint yourself as this flawless saint, but deep down you know if you didn't score goals, no one would care about what you have to say. You're just a commodity. Marketable, exotic, but disposable. Salah finally stood, not in anger, but purpose. The crowd hushed instantly. He adjusted the cuff of his sleeve, glanced briefly toward the audience, then back to Conrad. Let me tell you something, Salah said quietly, yet it carried through the room like thunder. I'm not here to be exotic. I'm here because I earned it. I didn't get here through privilege. I didn't have agents grooming me at 8 years old. I crossed borders with a broken accent and blistered feet. And every time I was told I didn't belong, I stayed. I worked harder. I scored goals. I lifted trophies. He stepped closer to the edge of the stage. I've seen kids from Cairo to Liverpool mimic my celebration, not because they want to be famous, but because they believe maybe they can be something more than what the world told them they could. That's why I'm here. That's why I speak. The crowd was on its feet again, full standing ovation. Some clapping, some cheering, some shouting his name. Mo, Mo, Mo! Conrad stood as well, but awkwardly, caught between trying to save face and being drowned out by the moment. And you, Salah said, turning back one last time, you'll forget this moment, but they won't, because they saw who you are and who I am. He didn't wait for a reply. He calmly removed his mic, handed it to a stunned stagehand, and began walking off the set. As he passed the cameras, the cheers only grew. Someone yelled, "You're a legend, Mo." Another, "Thank you for speaking truth." And from the back a voice shouted, "You embarrassed him without even raising your voice." Conrad stood alone on stage now, his carefully constructed persona, unraveling before millions of live viewers. The camera zoomed in on him for a moment too long, his expression blank, sweat glistening at his temple, the applause still thundering in the background, and as Salah disappeared behind the curtain, having said all he needed to say, one thing was unmistakably clear. He had won, not just the argument but the respect of everyone watching. Mohamed Salah was gone, having vanished behind the studio curtains with the kind of grace most people only find in silence after the storm. The stage remained frozen for a full 7 seconds. No dialogue, no movement. Just Conrad Bennett, standing alone in his carefully tailored suit, facing a live audience that had turned cold on him in real time. He forced a smile, one that barely clung to his lips, and reached for the stack of cue cards on the desk. "Well," he began, voice tight, "that was Mohamed Salah, ladies and gentlemen. Quite the sermon." No applause followed. The audience remained on their feet, but no longer in excitement, just stunned stillness. Some were whispering among themselves. A few had already walked out. Phones were out everywhere now, recording his every twitch, every blink, every crack in the polished persona that once intimidated guests into submission. Backstage, Salah moved quietly through the halls, the microphone still warm from the heat of his words lying in the hand of a stunned technician. The producer followed him in a half-jog, breathless, pleading. "Mo, Mr. Salah, please, we can cut some of that in the edit. We'll clean it up, maybe issue a formal—" "No need," Salah said calmly, turning to him. "Don't edit it. Let them see it all." And with that he walked out into the cold London air, free. Back inside the studio, chaos was bubbling. Conrad had lost the audience and he knew it. His control, his narrative, his myth of intellectual dominance, it had all shattered like glass the moment Salah had spoken the truth, with more power in 5 calm sentences then 1,000 of Conrad's provocation-laced interviews. Still live and desperate to regain the moment, he turned to the camera, voice slick with forced levity. That, folks, is what happens when someone can't handle a little pressure. Footballer or not, if you step on this stage, expect to be challenged. The control room's silence answered him louder than any jeer. His producer's voice buzzed in his ear a moment later, deadpan, biting. We're trending, not in a good way. By midnight, clips of the confrontation had flooded social media. Mohamed Salah destroys talk show host trended at number 1 globally. Verified journalists, celebrities, athletes, and everyday fans shared the footage on repeat, praising Salah for his unshakable composure and the devastating clarity of his message. One post read, "He never raised his voice, never insulted back, just told the truth, that's strength." Another, "Conrad Bennett just learned what real greatness looks like, not in goals, but in grace." Within hours, Salah's fans worldwide had mobilized, not in anger but in solidarity. Footage of children imitating his walk-off, his words, his poise, began to circulate. One clip showed a young Egyptian boy in a Liverpool jersey, standing in front of a mirror, repeating Salah's words, "I don't need to fight you to win." It went viral overnight. Meanwhile, for Conrad Bennett, the backlash was swift and unforgiving. Sponsors began pulling support. Several staff members from the production team leaked behind-the-scenes footage, showing Conrad rehearsing racially charged questions before Salah's arrival, laughing with writers about rattling the Egyptian prince. The internet erupted. A trending petition demanded Conrad's removal from the network. A major streaming service suspended plans to syndicate his past interviews. Former guests distanced themselves. One of them tweeted, "Now I know why I always left that studio feeling off. He's not challenging minds, he's humiliating people for ratings." The network scrambled to respond. A cold corporate statement followed within 24 hours. "We do not condone the language used on last night's episode. Internal reviews are underway." It wasn't enough. By the end of the week, the official announcement came. Conrad Bennett's show was put on indefinite hiatus, which everyone understood as code for cancellation. Bennett released a statement of his own, defensive, convoluted, claiming his words were taken out of context. But no one was buying it. The footage was crystal clear. In contrast, Salah didn't release a single public statement. No tweets, no interviews. When reporters approached him outside Melwood training ground days later, he offered only a short reply. "I'm a footballer. I spoke my truth. I'll let people decide what that means." But people had already decided. What they saw wasn't just a footballer confronting a bitter, xenophobic host. It was a man standing calmly in a storm of ignorance, disarming hate with patience, exposing cruelty with dignity. It became a case study in media ethics. University students wrote essays about it. Talk shows debated it. Athletes across sports referenced it in their own press interactions. Salah, already admired for his footballing brilliance, was now being spoken of as something more, a symbol of restraint under pressure, a beacon of integrity. And perhaps the most poetic twist of all? A week after the interview aired, a mural appeared in Salah's hometown of Nagrig, painted on the side of a school he'd helped fund. It depicted him in that now iconic moment, standing at the edge of the stage, mic in hand, speaking not with fury but with truth. Underneath, in Arabic and English, read the words, "I stayed, I spoke, I walked away stronger." The moment had passed, but the message remained. Long after the headlines faded and the hashtags stopped trending, the world remembered what happened, not because of who shouted the loudest, but because of who didn't have to. And somewhere, far from the cameras and the chaos, Mohamed Salah laced up his boots and stepped back onto the pitch, where, as always, he let his feet do the talking. But now, millions understood. He was more than a legend on the field. He was a champion off.